Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm really excited about this conversation. Paula and I, have been talking about this for a long time. Courtney works on this as well. We, bump into each other in various fora. And what is apparent is that the relationship between big tech and journalism is once more being remolded, especially in places outside of Western Europe and the US, where there are deals being made, in some cases, between big tech companies and news media organizations to remunerate them for using some of their content. In some cases, we're seeing also generative AI companies like OpenAI striking deals with many of the large publishers around the world. And so the relationship between big tech and news media is being molded in many different ways at the same time. But that we're facing a crisis is not an understatement. It is not crying wolf. For many, many news organizations, this is an existential crisis. And we've seen how the welfare of news media organizations can be controlled by just the swift change of an algorithm. And it's a very scary space to be in. We've tried many different modes of, trying different modes of business strategies, trying to work with big tech in many ways, and often to the detriment of news media organizations. So what we're hoping to do today is we have this distinguished panel, all of whom have been working on this issue from many different perspectives, to try to flesh out what are some of the most salient points between news media and big tech right now, and what that means about shaping the information ecosystem going forward. I'm from South Africa, and in South Africa right now there is a Competition Commission inquiry into the relationship between news and big tech. We're likely to see a report, an interim report from the Commission in October. And what has been interesting for me is that the Commission appears to be looking at the behavior of big tech, not solely from the perspective of business, but also from the constitutional mandate of access to information and the responsibility for big tech companies operating in a country to ensure access to information for South Africans. So it would be a fascinating development if indeed that is the route that Competition Commission takes in South Africa. But there are also similar conversations and similar developments in Brazil, in Indonesia. We also saw what happened in Canada. We also saw, Facebook is pulling out of news. They're just saying, well, news doesn't mean much to us anyway. It doesn't make us much money. So this has profound consequences for press freedom. And so I want to invite the OSCE Special Representative for Freedom of Expression to tell us a little bit more about what does this mean for press freedom?
Okay, let's see, it works. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be with you, and of course I'm very grateful to IPI to have me here today to discuss such an important topic. And Khadija, it's a pleasure, Courtney and Miraglia, it's a pleasure to be with you and have you as my fellow panelists. Let me take a step back and try to look at the issue of the relation between big tech and journalism and media freedom from the point of view of democracy. And why? Because when we look at media freedom in the OSCE, we are, of course, looking at a concept that is a very specific concept of the OSCE, comprehensive security, that is, of course, supported by an agenda for peace and security. So I always like to to be sure that we are looking to media freedom as a key pillar for democracy, and being a key pillar for democracy is a key pillar for peace and security. So this is the way we look at media freedom, and we look at all the challenges media freedom is facing right now, and of course one of them is definitely the big tech, the online platforms, all the disruptions in our information public space, and this is also very important. So I'm not going to look very much into the technicalities, but much more what are the consequences of it. And of course, when we have an online space that is our information space, because now most of you migrated to this online space of information space, it's important to see the consequences. And this space is completely dominated by the big tech, the big platforms, with a very specific business model, with business structural failures. These business failures, of course, are from the point of view of human rights, not from the point of view of profit. Of course, from this point of view of profit, it's a very rewarding system, and it's a very rewarding model. But in any case, this is creating a big fragmentation in our shared reality, with tremendous consequences in our democratic participation, and also in our capacity to avoid this the division and the polarization within our community, within our societies. And this is, of course, very problematic regarding democracy and the healthy functioning of democracy.
Thank you. Courtney, in many instances, we're still talking about how we can tackle big tech companies for the value they've extracted from having news on their platforms and benefiting from that. But in many ways, that ship has sailed, because the next frontier is generative AI, and that will have even more profound consequences for us. And I know you've been doing a lot of work on thinking about how generative AI may indeed reshape news media.
Yes, so I mean, I think that the situation we're in now, we've realized much more quickly that we cannot simply allow big tech to set the rules of the game and play along. And so we're seeing much more quickly a reaction by the press and by countries around the world to push back through litigation and to seek licensing deals much more quickly. So let me just take a step back. I'm the director of the Center for Journalism and Liberty at Open Markets Institute, which is a political economy think tank. And I think that one of the most important things that we're missing as press freedom advocates and human rights advocates is the power of antitrust and competition policy to actually restructure some of this, because norms are very important. Human rights are important, but we lack tools and sticks. And so these efforts around news media bargaining codes, which are what they passed in Australia, in Canada, we have proposals in several states in the US as well as federal, and around the world. You mentioned South Africa. So we're really seeing this awareness by regulators that the market is fundamentally distorted and imbalanced, and that has very detrimental impacts to democratic governance, to elections. And so there are these efforts to rebalance through news media bargaining codes that specific relationship. And this is not going to solve our problem. This is not going to solve the extinction event, but it's very important. And to some extent, these efforts that have primarily focused on requiring big tech, search, and social media platforms to come to a negotiating table, allow small publishers to collectively negotiate for the value of their product, have benefited from the fact that, okay, first of all, who among here has tried to get a tech platform on the phone or via email and never gotten a response? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what this does is it creates a table, a mandatory negotiating framework. That's a regulation. This is not a tax. This is saying we want to allow you in the private marketplace to negotiate. So in that sense, it's kind of beneficial because it creates a level of distance between, say, direct government intervention and the platform relationship. What I want to see these laws do is expand the definition of what platforms are covered from beyond just search and social to include AI companies. So right now, I hope I'm not considered a troll on LinkedIn, but I saw this post about a $1 billion investment by Meta and NVIDIA, $1 billion startup valuation. And it's some data company. So they've scraped everyone's data and created a company worth $1 billion. They did not compensate anyone from that data. And I think one thing that we as journalists and the news industry have to do is push back very hard on this idea that somehow copyright is inadequate and somehow all we do as journalists are convey facts. Yes, of course, we are in the fact business. But as you heard yesterday from our colleagues reporting in Gaza, from our colleagues who reported here in Sarajevo during war, these facts are not just there for the picking. You have to go out and uncover them and talk to people and observe and put your life on the line. And we must push back against this idea that somehow, because we're in the fact business, our work does not deserve copyright protection. Is it imperfect? Yes. However, it is the legal framework we have. And I think that if we're able to convey the value of that, we then need to get smart and think about, we heard earlier, for example, from AP, all the areas where that value lies. So your archives have huge value. And if we talk about AI, we talk a lot about large language models. Those are the foundation models that underpin ChatGPT, generative search, content summarization, content creation. News is a very important part of those foundation models. It's among the top 5 sites in one of the major large language models created by Google. It is a major specific news source within the Common Crawl corpus, which is used for training most LLMs. None of that has been compensated. And then there's something called retrieval augmented generation, RAGs. If you haven't heard that term, I have a paper, you can read it. Please learn that term. That is the value of your news currently to all of these consumer-facing applications, all of these, billionaire AI unicorns who are creating these great products that are built on our work, our data, without compensation. Furthermore, AI systems degrade when they are trained on synthetic media, when they're trained on AI-generated content. So that means the constant creation of human quality journalism by us has a lot of value. You might even think it will have more value going forward because of the potential for model degradation and model collapse without access to that content. So there's a lot of ways that we provide value. Happy to go into the details there, but I think that the key messages are we have to leverage copyright, push back against the idea that it's fair use because it's just a bunch of facts. We have to understand AI systems and where our various types of value portray there. And we need legislation like news media bargaining codes to create a table to go to mandate negotiation, and to allow small publishers to collectively bargain.
Thanks, Courtney. Paula, the thing that alarms me a little bit about generative AI, and what I know about it is dangerous, perhaps as dangerous as the tools themselves. But what alarms me as well is how much this may deepen the inequality, information inequality in the world, especially when these language models are being developed from data sets that are predominantly based in English and also based in the US or Western Europe. And what does that mean for the rest of us, the global majority? And I know in Brazil, this is, you've been grappling with big tech and understanding how, what the consequences it will have in very profound ways. I'd love for you to tell, it astounds me that, at some point, when the Brazilian government was considering legislation, over the last 2 years or so, Google actually changed its homepage. So every person, settling on Google.com actually got greeted by a message saying, "Your government is trying to ruin the internet." Yeah, that's really subtle, really extraordinary, really, and tells you a lot. I mean, you could not opt out of that. Everyone uses Google. And here you had Google telling you that your government is trying to ruin the internet. What was that about?
So, good morning, and thanks for, good morning you all, good morning to my fellow panelists, and thanks for the IPI for inviting me to this conversation. I was remembering today, 2 years ago, on another IPI Congress, we had a panel on this topic, and the name of the panel was something along frenemies, the relationship between journalists. I think we're so beyond that in only 2 years. I don't think anyone would call us frenemies anymore. So thank Khadija for the question. I think that the lobby that Google and other platforms did when we tried to regulate, to approve a bill that would minimally regulate platforms, showed us many aspects of how the asymmetry of power between our industry and the tech platforms is established. Google has more than 90% of market share when it comes to search, so they use that very wrongly. They're even being investigated because of doing that, to advertise their vision about the regulation that was being proposed, and they did that saying that that specifically bill would ruin your free internet. They weren't alone. I think the lobby there was very much of a coordination among different tech industries. I think it showed us several things. Our industry, so to go back a little bit, I think that we need to come to terms with the fact that tech has always had a role when it comes to the media industry. It was differently across history, and it was an important one. In a concentrated market like Brazil, where media was basically 5 legacy papers, that was very much a family business, and that concentration meant a lot for our public debate. So the digital transformation was responsible for enabling a lot of digital natives that actually changed the market. I'm a media entrepreneur. I founded 2 digital outlets in Brazil, and I became involved with the tech conversation because I had to advocate for my outlets. I had to advocate for us to become part of Google News Showcase. I had to tell them, you're harming us. If you're talking about innovation, if you're talking about supporting the industry and not including us because you only want to have deals with legacy publishers, you're harming this market and you're making
Paula, can I just interrupt you? Could you explain to people what Google News Showcase is? Because some people might actually not know.
Thanks, Khadija. So yes, Google News Showcase is a program where Google pays news publishers some sort of licensing because they use our content to populate search. So the relationship is not, they question us about search, so we don't make money with your content, but they actually do because our content is what populates search, and is, as Courtney was saying, our content is what's going to inform the models, not to train them, but to inform them every day. So AI now is a development of what is search, of what search was. So Google developed a program, which was also a PR program. It was something to, in advance of regulatory efforts, to pay news publishers. The criteria to pay news publishers weren't transparent at all. Facebook also had a project. It was called Facebook Journalism Project, and they would give money out to news publishers. How they would select those publishers, we don't know. How the amount of money that was paid was settled, we don't know. Being part of the program, would that impact your positioning on search? We don't know. Not being part of the program would hurt you in terms of search or distribution in the feed? We don't know. So what this shows us is that they have all the information, they have the money, we have no information, we have no data, we depend on their money. So what happened is that we looked at that as we're talking about gifts. So we're getting money, we're getting distribution, these are obviously not gifts. What we were developing there was a relationship of extreme dependence on media platforms. They are today the great mediators between us and our readership. And in this case, I'm not only talking about digital natives, I'm talking about anyone. We all depend on them to distribute our content. We all depend on them to moderate our content. With criteria, they're not transparent at all. We need also to look into our industry and realize that in the past 10 years, almost every innovation that came into the industry came from the big tech. And again, we took as gifts. So I'm talking about the software that transcripts information, the thing that measures the audience, we got from them. So what we have today is an industry that has a big dependence on big tech to distribute, to moderate, a financial dependence, and an industry that is under a huge crisis, and an industry that has lost its capacity to innovate. And because we are under pressure, whenever you're under pressure, you have very little capacity to innovate, you have no capacity to take risks. So it's really an equation that we need to change urgently. Because as Courtney was saying, as Teresa was saying, as I was saying, there's a huge asymmetry of power here. We need to sit at the table in a different position. So I don't want to be sitting here just to announcing the end of the world. I think there are like many ways forward, and we can talk more about that. But I think one is to have a vision for our industry. We need to have a vision for our industry that is less naive. AI is not about selecting the best headline. No. It's not about that at all. AI is something that is going to reshape our industry entirely. We need to be capable of attributing value to our content. We cannot be engaged in negotiations. We need to set the agenda. We need to be able to say how much our content values. And this is an exercise that we are not necessarily used to do. We need to learn that. They are miles ahead of us in terms of technical expertise. Let's learn that. Let's engage with economists. Let's engage with lawyers. Let's have a vision for ourselves. I think it's time that we don't expect any gift, but we fight for what is right for our industry. And just to finish, I think there is one particular challenge here. I'm not a journalist. I came into this industry 10 years ago. In my previous life, I was very much involved with advocacy on a very specific industry, which was gun control. This is a whole different lobby. They have very nice people. They hire very nice people. It's different from the gun industry. It's a strategy. Let's not fool ourselves. It's a strategy. And it's not enough to be anti-tech. I can sit here and say I'm 100% anti the gun industry. It's not enough to be anti-tech. We need them. So we need to figure out a way of establishing a different relationship. And we need to better position ourselves.
Courtney, you've been writing about what some of these new dynamics might be. But what is the policy that, if you could advise, both policymakers, but also media professionals, media managers, what are the policies we should be looking at pursuing? I mean, you've talked a little bit about that, but, if we leave this room, all of us here being a little alarmed maybe about what the future holds, what is the one thing we actually need to be laser focused on?
Well, unfortunately, you're going to need a multi-pronged laser. So first of all, who is aware of the antitrust trials against Google for their advertising search happening right now. So we're a room of journalists. Every hand should be up because this will be definitional. So first of all, big tech is the problem, not technology. Very different. We don't put big in capital letters in front of industries that are doing good things, right? We have big tobacco, big pharma, et cetera. So big tech is problematic. There are really important antitrust trials that are looking at whether they should break them up. I think too many people, we think, I've been in the digital rights, like press freedom world for a long time, and it just seemed like this pipe dream that we could possibly do anything about it. But actually we can. There are trials underway. So that is the first thing. Train your journalism on these incredibly consequential legal processes happening in the US and the EU, where they have the power to divide up the advertising from other lines of business. That will be very important, right? So, more than 89% of Meta and Google's revenue is from digital advertising, and that value is created in part through our work. So secondly, we need to think creatively about how to govern these platforms. So in Canada, instead of comply with a democratically enacted law, Facebook has decided to censor the news. Now, they said that they're unable to comply. Google just yesterday announced that, it won't be able to pay, Google News Initiative, the news publishers that are part of this if this California law passes. No, we need to call it what it is. It's censorship, it's blocking access to particular kinds of information, and it is trying to use its muscle in addition to the propaganda it's putting forth on their platforms, using their lobbying muscle, et cetera, to push back against democratically enacted legislation. So I think one of the most important things we can do is look at big tech platforms in search, in social media, and potentially in foundation models, and governing them as common carriers. Let's look at the past. How have we governed other critical information communication technologies and the media system? Well, in the US, for example, our cable broadcasters are required to carry local broadcasters. Also, they cannot put them on channel 999. Local broadcasters are allowed to ask for the same channel on cable as they have on terrestrial. That's very important, must carry. In Europe, many countries have laws around must carry of linguistic content, cultural content. Let's resurrect this idea of must carry, and this is my idea, let's add a little bit, which is must pay. Must carry, must pay. You cannot be creating foundational models or doing, generative search if you don't have access to quality information. This will degrade the entire information environment. So let's explore, how do we ensure access to adequate information? We cannot allow quality journalism to become a luxury good. 74% of American newsrooms are now behind paywalls. That's not good for democracy, right? We can't say, I'm all for business, innovation, et cetera, but we cannot say that subscriptions and memberships are the only way we're going to be able to get revenue for the industry. We must make information available to the public. And the answer is also not to take all of that information offline so AI crawlers can't read it. No, we need public policy frameworks that require that they compensate in a regulatory framework for use of that content. And they must not be able to say, okay, well, we'll just use all that, Russian propaganda, all the content farm information, all the synthetic media to train our models, to run our, social media and search. That's not the answer. So we need to get creative. We need to break up their power. These big tech companies are also dominating not just the things that Paula mentioned, but also the cloud. Cloud is a critical but unfocused element of much of our work, especially for watchdog journalism, data journalism. The way that some of these licensing deals with publishers are taking place include requirements to use these platforms' clouds. So again, they're embedding themselves into our work, into our businesses, and into our editorial strategies. We need to adopt policies that require a separation between those two. So we don't want to bring them in to train us on how to use their latest AI products. Why? Because that will create dependencies on those very products. It will make it much more difficult to make those hard choices about whether to support challenging regulation and licensing legislation and regulation versus maybe you're going to end up losing out on your, the pennies you're getting over here voluntarily. And as you said, Paula, all of these deals are secret. We don't know the terms. We don't know the value. But it's not only that, it's that right now what we're seeing is that the AI companies, they know the value of news. That's why they're creating licensing deals with major media platforms. But how many people in this room, with the exception of the AP, have a licensing deal with an AI company? Okay, because you're all small. You're in global south countries. You're in non-English languages. If we do not approach this as a collaborative effort among the journalism fraternity and the news industry, all those, no offense again to the AP, but like all those big news organizations that are making these deals without adequate information and without really understanding their value might end up destroying the rest of us. And we know we live in an ecosystem. We know that local journalism, foreign journalism, multilingual journalism, filters up that we're part of an ecosystem. And so I really would encourage large publishers to figure out how do we make sure that these deals are going to be beneficial more broadly, and that we need the public policy in place to ensure that that takes place.
Courtney, I want to come back to you, but I want to give Teresa a chance as well to respond. And Teresa, we were together in Warsaw last year, where I was struck in the discussions you had in the meeting over there. Of course, the OSCE is a multilateral forum, and how much the landscape there is dominated by what's happening with Russia and Russia's weaponization of information in various ways, and how much that dominates the discussion. So I'm wondering, is there space within these fora to actually, ensure that that is important, but that is also one symptom, really, of a bigger problem within our information ecosystem, as our other panelists here have demonstrated.
Thank you very much for the question, and also thank you very much, Paula and Courtney, for your very important statements. But precisely because I'm coming from an intergovernmental organization, which means that the political power is there, it's important also to frame our discussion having that in consideration, and a geopolitical situation. Because one of the problems for not being restrictive or having regulations regarding the big tech, of course, is but it will hamper, stifle innovation. It will put our collective West and global South and whatever in a very fragile situation regarding, for example, China. So the geopolitical tension and competition plays an important role in all our discussions. And if we don't have, and if you don't take into consideration all the elements that are poisoning right now the measures that should be taken, or the positions or the political will that should be clear regarding the measures that are needed, as we are facing really a very, very, I would say, extreme, detrimental risk for democracy. And this is the problem. We have a geopolitical problem. We can, of course, work, and we should, in different layers. The journalists, the think tanks and academia, the legal layer, But then we have the political layer, and this is the most difficult. And this because it's very much influenced by the geopolitical tension.
Yeah.
So how can we really go beyond this? It's another question, and it's a very difficult one. And you know, one thing that I do remember that in the beginning of Biden administration, there was almost a bipartisan consensus to look at AI, to look at the big tech, to look at Section C. So it was there. 4 years later, what happened? Zero.
Well,
not zero.
Not zero.
Not zero. Not zero.
But not enough.
Not enough. And this is the problem. This is the problem. It's back and forth, but it's not really progressing to the point that we would like it to. And one of the issues that I think it's important is really advocacy regarding how it impacts democracy, and to raise awareness that it's not just a problem of business, of technological progress, but it's much more than that. And if we don't fight for that, our democracy will be at risk. And so we have difficult choices to make, but we have to do this kind of exercise and to make these difficult choices. There is no other way. And as you both mentioned, Paula and Courtney, to work at all levels. This is very important. But at the same time, to wrap it in democracy defense and security defense. That's the reason why I started by saying when we look at big tech, when we look at media freedom within big tech, we are thinking about peace and security, we are thinking about democracy, because democracy really is much more linked to peace and security than authoritarian regimes do. So, you know, and this is a kind of discussion we need to link, to connect all the dots, to really make a case, and make a case that can have an impact on everyone. Because what we have today, it's not just a question of having good journalism. Okay, but how to, then we have must carry, must pay, fantastic, but still, we have all the other problems. And the other problems are linked to a kind of a fight between ethos and pathos. We have all the manipulation, all the disinformation, together with journalism. What is going to happen? I'm sure that pathos will prevail. How can we solve this problem? So we have so many problems, so many layers, that's the reason why it's so difficult to cope with it. Because we are in our bubbles, also discussing, okay, I will look at it from the point of view of the sustainability of the media, fantastic, it's very important. I'm on my bubble of the protection of copyright, fantastic, very needed, but okay, now it's time to connect the dots. Thank you.
Paula?
Yes, thank you, Teresa, for bringing that aspect, because the geopolitical aspect, because this is, for me, is one big challenge that we face. Sitting at, like, being Brazilian, and if you think about an emerging market or our emerging markets, I think AI is perceived as a great opportunity, and of course, we want to take this opportunity. So, the conflict between having a regulation that is more strict and creating obstacles to development, to innovation, is huge. And I think we need to address the difference there is when you're talking about the global south in emerging markets and countries where the economies are more consolidated. Because there is a choice to be made that, and to find that balance is not easy, and I'm very much afraid. We are currently in Brazil discussing an AI regulation bill, and that tension is there and is constant. And even if you think about the US and Europe, I think that this is a difference that's weaponized all the time. So I've listened more than once, like how many companies you have in the US, because the European Union, Europe has been more efficient in regulating the US, far more efficient. We're talking about American companies. In a country, the US has not been capable of regulating their own companies. The regulation is like almost none. You have a specific, but not in the way there should be. And Europe has been more efficient in this regard. And I've heard over and over. So how many companies that have made more than $1 billion you have in the US, and how many of these companies you have in Europe? So this is a debate. And is a debate that's going to put a lot of pressure on regulation processes with different consequences to our markets. So I think we absolutely need to take into account. I also think that the idea of a free internet or freedom of expression is being misused, like there was some sort of conflict with regulation and freedom of speech, regulation and freedom of expression. This is a narrative that has been built to serve specific interests. We live in a country as Brazil where platforms haven't been regulated, going through several elections where misinformation played a key role. I would say that not having regulation is what have jeopardized freedom of expression, our democracy. So let's not feed into just this equation. It's quite the opposite. Regulation will guarantee freedom of expression. Regulation is what's going to guarantee our democracies. Let's not allow anyone who has very specific interests to say that regulation equals censorship. It doesn't serve us at all. I just want to make sure I can share with you, I think I see some hope. I said that I wasn't sitting here to announce the end of the world. So I'm currently leading an initiative that's called Journalism and Task Force, and it's funded by International Fund for Public Interest Media. And what I'm doing is trying to come up with knowledge that will help us sit at a table in a different position. So I'm currently conducting a research about AI with selected publishers in Brazil. What I'm finding is that, and I'm talking to legacy, digital natives, commercial, NGOs, and I think there's interesting things there. I think one is like, for the first time, I see the digital natives having leverage. Many of them, they know much more about technology than the legacy players. And this is leverage. And we should, I think this is great. And because of that, they can understand better how to position themselves in this negotiation. But what I'm seeing as well is a reloaded process of negotiation, and I think we need to act urgently. Because how does that work? I think that big tech, and now we have a new player, OpenAI and Microsoft, they will approach the big players as they are doing. And this is a market that is very much under pressure. So the minute your competitor signs an agreement, you're in a disadvantage. So you need to sign an agreement as well. So I heard that the New York Times has spent $1 million suing OpenAI. Who has $1 million to spend on a lawsuit? Only the New York Times. So no one is in a position to go against them. So the minute your competitors sign an agreement, even if you're a big player, you need to sign an agreement as well. And if you're a smaller organization, you're just going to be engaged in these agreements. So the collective approach is key. And we need to understand that even when we think that we have signed good deals individually, we're getting much less than we deserve. If we are able to move collectively, we have better chance of succeeding. It's very hard. It's an industry that is very much under pressure, that is not used to collaborate, because precisely is under pressure. There is need for collaboration right now. And just to conclude this intervention, I think also it's very important for us to have a global perspective. It's also very important for us to consider the specificities of each market. So there is a real risk of retaliation, and we've seen this. We've seen this in Canada. We're seeing with Meta saying that it's not going to renew the agreement on Australia. We're seeing with Google saying that it's going to remove publishers from search in California. So the retaliation is there, and they've learned that they can do it without big consequences. So I think they're feeling very comfortable with this perspective. This sort of retaliation in markets such as Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia would ruin our markets. So when we are discussing regulation, we need to take that into account. Our markets, unfortunately, are not so resilient. So we cannot also discuss regulation bills that will jeopardize our markets. We need to take that into account as well.
So I just wanted to just pick up on something you said there. Paula mentioned what happened in Canada. So what happened in Canada was there was, basically a regulation that was passed, and in response to that, Facebook has basically said we're pulling out of news. So that you cannot find news on Facebook any longer.
They're censoring Canadian news.
Yes.
They're not pulling out of
yes,
news.
That's very important. Yes. So you can understand how when the biggest source of information in a particular geography decides that we will not allow quality information to be distributed, the consequences that may have.
Can you just make an observation?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've used the new search from Google. So you like the generative AI search engine now at Google, you don't get links anymore. You got a small text and then you don't necessarily need to go to a website. So you can understand how this might ruin our industry. So you get the information you need, you get on search. You can opt out of that. You can say, I don't want you, Google, to use my material. I don't want you, Google, to use my information. But then you're out of search. You're basically out of the internet. So that's where we stand. I mean, there is a risk. That's the size of the risk that we have.
Courtney?
I mean, and also to that point is like that is detrimental to democracy. Yeah. To be like, hey, we're just not going to be there anymore. And if you look at the data, and again, happy to share a report with anyone who's interested, but zero-click searches, so basically where people don't click through, were already a big issue in search before generative search. Data is showing, even from smaller AI companies or these answer engines, generative search, that even when they include citations and links, it's still a very low click-through rate, which means we've got to get away from this myopic view of value as referral traffic. Same with the news media bargaining codes and search. But I really wanted to plus one Teresa's excellent points about the geopolitics of this, and also just to kind of build the words we use matter. Another reason we should not be using generative AI to write our stories, right? Because whether you call something pulling out of news or censorship, and this is, sorry, I'm not like picking on you, but that's a big difference. It's not pulling out of news. They are literally censoring a specific category of information. If we talk about it better, people will understand better. And so similarly with the geopolitics, in the US, this is very present, right? The China scare, that, we've got to be able to innovate. Look at the data. Big tech is less innovative, and innovation has gone down according to facts. If we did better research, look at the facts. The big tech was allowed to merge or acquire with 900 companies since they started, with no restrictions from any competition authorities. Until very recently, now we're realizing the so-called innovation in AI. It's not innovative. OpenAI, Microsoft has a 49% ownership stake in OpenAI. Look, we have a great graph, happy to share it with folks in our AI and public interest report, where we looked at all of these AI startups. They all have major investments from big tech. Big tech, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft. It's funny that we kind of like them, even though they're like the old monopolist, but to your point, they hire really nice people. Google and Meta. Those companies are trillion-dollar companies. they are more wealthy and powerful than most governments, yes. Right? If they threaten to take out search from a country or shut off Facebook, that will have massive repercussions, and they can do that with impunity. And, you know, yes, I agree that we've completely abdicated as the United States our responsibility to regulate these platforms. However, it's interesting, and I took issue a little bit because big tech, problems with big tech power is like the one weird sliver of bipartisan agreement in our incredibly divided and broken Congress. And we've seen regulatory agencies and the Department of Justice under the Biden administration bringing antitrust cases against these companies. We've seen, luckily, the EU trying to do that, but let's be real, you need the US to come in and do it. We've seen efforts by the Federal Trade Commission to look at when you've gotten ill-gotten data and created products from that, like it's happened with Amazon, where I think they violated some children privacy rights. So they not only had to get rid of the data, they also were required to destroy the algorithms that they created from that data. Now that's a powerful punishment. That is also what the New York Times lawsuit is asking or demanding of OpenAI and Microsoft. It seems like it's impossible, but it should be possible, right? We shouldn't cover things also as journalists as if it's so impossible. We should not give in to this acquiescence that innovation only happens with big tech, that competition is going to somehow be detrimental to our national security. And if we keep competing according to the rules and set by these companies that have zero interest in actually upholding democracy because their only fiduciary responsibility is to their shareholders. Not only are the companies trillion-dollar companies, their founders, all white men, most of them based in Silicon Valley, are also poised to become trillionaires. Okay, if 1 second is 1 million, 32 years is 1 billion. I don't even know how many a trillion is. Like the scope and scale, we just write B and T, but we don't think about the scope and scale. Let's help our readers and our audiences visualize the power that these companies have. And also let's be very careful as journalists who we interview and platform in our work to help explain the situation that we're in. Because too often we're quoting think tanks, researchers, lobbyists who are getting big tech funding. Let's really make the effort to find independent voices to help explain what's going on, because otherwise we risk having a very narrow conception. And to your point about freedom of expression and that we were so locked in step with the platforms for so long, like, oh, we can't regulate. Oh, we really need Section 230. Like, of course you need immunity from responsibility for what you publish. We are no longer in the startup days of the internet. And thankfully, there are these efforts to re-explore some of these, but we're too slow. And so we have it's not only what is it doing to our industry, but our industry plays a fundamental role in helping the public and frankly politicians as well understand what's happening. Let's platform small businesses, real, tiny innovators, et cetera, as we're trying to understand what's happening and not just parrot and give in to the terminology that they're using without questioning what we should actually be talking about when we talk about innovation, competition, geopolitics.
Thank you. No, and thank you very much for this very passionate and strong statement. It was really interesting. It means that the control of the narratives is within the big tech companies, and this is the problem. And we cannot. So far we did not manage to break it, and that's the problem precisely because, and this what can, in a way, slow down this kind of enthusiasm and continuous, empowerment of the big tech companies. Reputational damages. coming from civil society, coming from the communities, coming from citizens. This really can stop, because reputational damages is something that is really bad for the big companies. And that's the reason why I think it's important advocacy, it's important to link it to democracy, it's important to show to everyone this is the impact of what the big tech companies are doing. And then the governments will feel much more at ease to regulate.
As you can tell, this is a group of people who are really committed to this subject. And so we could have an entire conference about it. But we do need to wrap up. So I'm going to hand over to Paula.
I'm sorry. Thanks, Khadija. I would like just to make two final remarks. I think that one is we need to understand that the level of private interests, the power of the private interests currently is unprecedented. I don't think that never in history we had such powerful business, not in store, like not oil, not pharmaceutical. It's unprecedented. And it's completely merged into our lives. We need to understand that. It's part of our lives in a way that we cannot opt out. So how can we make them accountable? And it's not about lack of information. We have tons of information. We have whole countries that have suffered. We have kids. We have data on mental health. We have democracies that have been ruined. We have that information. We have proof. And until today, no one has been held accountable. And why? Because the concentration of power is unprecedented. We need to have that clear. So it's a key issue, not only for our industry, for our societies. We cannot have private interests shaping the public debate, period. And we need to be very committed to that. On a more concrete remark, the task force is a global initiative based in Brazil, and the same research I'm conducting in Brazil, I expect to replicate in other countries. I think that we need to build knowledge coming from our markets, our countries, our vision, our needs. So please reach out, because I would like to talk more. And I think that we need to come to build a global vision that comes from the South. I think that this would be a great contribution to the global debate. Thanks.
I just want to conclude by saying, I've been saying this line as well, that never in history we've seen companies as powerful as this. But I've been reading a bit of history recently, and actually, remember the East India Company? We have seen companies as powerful as this, and they've actually they were integral to the construction of empire. And this is what we're seeing. And on that note, we will conclude. Thank you very much.